Hello there. Today in our Halloween themed episode, we're covering a few interesting features of Power Automate, which you're probably going to want to know about if you're getting started with the platform. And it doesn't matter whether it's Halloween or not, you're going to want to know these things. So we're going to cover a few concepts. I have some content here, which I'm going to drag into SharePoint, and I'm going to use a flow in Power Automate to determine how scary these materials are. Now we're going to cover a few concepts here such as auto tagging of content, triggering flows when specific properties have been changed and not otherwise, introducing and or conditional logic into your if statements, encapsulating actions into a scope, calling out to other services, in this case cognitive services, to assess that content sentiment, and doing some conditional formatting in SharePoint to show the content graphically in a much nicer way than it would normally be shown. So this is some of the content which I've already dragged into a SharePoint library. Let's just take a quick look at it. So we have some poetry. It's Time to Fear. We have Halloween by Robert Burns. We have some candy photos, Trick or Treat. We have some little witches. We have some jack-o'-lanterns with spiders and the like. Some more Halloween paraphernalia. We have a poem called The Emperor of Ice Cream, which sounds very nice but has some rather dark undertones. We have The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, a particular Halloween favorite. And we have The Demon Drink, just to see what the AI makes of it. So these have been dragged in, except for one of these, but there's a reason for this. So if we look at the library, okay, it's just a document library. This content is in here, but there's not much happening. No one has added any metadata to this content. So really, apart from the title names, there's not very much that we can do with this. But we want to know more about this content. And as I say, we want to know how scary it is for Halloween purposes. Well, it turns out some of this is actually done for you out of the box. Because if we go along, and I'm just going to edit the view, it turns out that there are a couple of system properties which are set by SharePoint behind the surface. We have tags and we have extracted text. Now, as I say, I haven't added these tags. These are automatically created by SharePoint Online when you add this sort of content. So we can see that actually the Halloween poem, it realizes that it's a screenshot, but it's actually done OCR automatically, optical character recognition. So it's actually written the content of the poem, even though it was a graphic, and it's put it into some metadata. The reason being this is going to help SharePoint search if you're looking for this content. The same with the Robert Burns poem. And then the candy has got lots of nice descriptive tags about it. There's no text in the image, so no extracted text there. And it goes on. The group of girls, it's noted that this was Halloween. The AI has picked up on this one, and they also mention things like October, because that's when Halloween happens, of course. So they're putting lots of nice context around these images. It's pretty good stuff. Okay, well, that's a really good start. I didn't have to do any work at all to get that, but to get this scariness index, which I'm going to want to create, then I do have to create a flow in Power Automate to get what I need. Well, okay, I've done a little bit of preparation. So if we just go and we edit the view again, we're just going to see that I've added a couple of extra columns, these being inclusion and scariness. So we'll OK that one. Okay, ideal. So inclusion is just a choice field. The reason I've set up a choice field is I want to trigger the sentiment analysis on this visually rather than it just happening in the background away from the video. So this is what we're doing. The values are new, which is the default value when you add something to the library. And then we've got rejected. I don't want to do anything with this. Approved, which means yes, derive the scariness index for this. And then finally, we have complete, which means no further analysis is needed here. Now I have an existing solution which is going to operate here, and then I'll show you how to actually write it yourselves. So basically, if I change the inclusion field to be approved instead, this is going to ultimately kick off a flow in the background, and then we should get a scariness index written here. So this is the first thing. And then what I'll do is, if we have a few values as to show us what's happening, then we will turn off that flow and we'll actually create a new one and show that this is working. It won't take too long. So there we go. We've got a couple of values set there. If we do a refresh, no, it's not quite happened yet. Okay, let's give it another refresh. Oh, there it is. It's actually shown up. Okay, now this is actually pulled from Cognitive Services, and it's a number between 0 and 1 by default. The higher the number, the closer to 1, then actually the more positive this is. So you can see actually the Halloween poem and the Robert Burns poem, the language used in there is actually quite positive, so they both get a pretty good score, as in they're not scary. Okay, let's actually write a flow which is going to achieve the same thing. So we'll just switch over to Power Automate, and we're going to create a new flow because the old one has just been turned off. Now this is going to be automated, as in it starts because something has happened, and we'll call this one scariness factor. Now, because this needs to happen only when certain properties, as in the inclusion field, has changed, then there's a very specific trigger which we need to do. This is a fairly new feature in SharePoint. So it's when a item or file is modified. This is the one. It doesn't look so different from the other ones, but believe me, this is the trigger you need. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So we're going to create our flow. As usual, we need to tell it which site we're dealing with here and which library. And then we have the next step, and this is a SharePoint step again. We want this to tell us what changes have happened to the properties. And this is this one, get changes for an item or a file, properties only. So this is once again a fairly new action which has been added to Power Automate, but we still have to put in the site details. We're going to add the item ID that was from the very first step, from the trigger. Now, this is going to tell us the property changes for this particular item since the last time the flow was run. Now, you can kind of see the helpful text here. It's saying put in a Windows Start token or an item version label, e.g. 3.0, etc., etc. So you can put version numbers and things like that in here, but I'm going to follow their advice. And if we search for trigger, it's actually a trigger Windows Start token. And this is kind of a built-in thing which tells it since the last time the flow ran. We can also do the same for the end trigger. We'll just do this out of the box value that they've put here. So this is going to check for changed properties since the last time it checked effectively. Next step, we're just going to create a variable here because it's going to hold one of the values. So initialize variable, we're going to call it sentiment score. It's going to be a float because it's a number between 0 and 1, and it's not going to have an initial value. So far, so good. Now let's add a condition. So this is a if statement effectively. So we're going to find whether a column has changed since the last time? And we want to know, has column changed inclusion? So once again, this is working from this thing, get changes from for an item or file since last time the flow was run, and these are all built into that. So I want to make sure that inclusion has changed. So we'll say true. Notice we do it as an expression when we say true, not just a string. That's great, but I don't just want to know if inclusion has changed. I need to make sure that inclusion is equal to approved, and then we'll proceed to do our work. So we're going to add a second part to this, which is checking the inclusion value that's been specified. There we are. Inclusion value is equal to, and it's going to be approved. And this is a string this time. Okay, so far so good. And notice we're doing this as an and. We could have done it as an or, but in this case, no. An and is what we need. We want this to be true, and we want this to be true to proceed. Now, if it's not true, then we can just terminate the flow because there's no work to be done. So let's choose terminate. It's not a failure. It's just no further action needed. Okay, so now if these conditions are met, we're actually going to do some processing. I am going to add a scope here. Here we go. And within the scope, then I'm going to do a little bit of work. So for example, let's put another condition in here. Yeah, control. This is what we want. Yes. And let's see, well, okay, let me explain this one. It's much better if I do that. Notice what's happening for our different types of content. So when it was kind of a screenshot of text, then the tags is just coming up with something that says text inside it. And you're getting all this good OCR content here. But when it's an image that didn't have any text in it, you're not getting any OCR content, of course, but you are getting lots and lots of rich tags. So I need to differentiate between these ones. If this was a production flow, maybe you would be very careful about exactly what you put here. But for me, just the inclusion of the word text in tags tells me that it's effectively something where I need to look at the OCR content. And so this is what we're going to do. We're going to say if tags does not contain the word text, then that means that it's going to be one of the ones where we can look at the tags for our sentiment analysis. So let's do that, shall we? So if yes, add an action, and we're going to do sentiment. So we're going to use this service called Text Analytics, which is part of Microsoft's cognitive services. Now, I've already signed up for a free trial in the background, so this is all here, and I don't have to do anything else. If you want to use these cognitive services, you may also need to do the same. Now, some of these services, when you sign up for them, they're actually free if it's low volume, like 1,000 calls a month or something. And some of them you do have to pay a little bit. But if you sign up for the free trial, it's free in any event for that first month. So I'm going to detect sentiment on some of this text. This is giving me an idea of scariness, you see. So it asks, what document are you detecting this on? So this is the ID of the list item, or the library item, I should say. And then it's like, well, what text within there is it that you want to identify? And because this is one of the images, it's going to have tags filled out. And so it's going to be tags that I want to check out. There we go. And also optionally, you can specify what language it's likely to be in. And I'm going to say English, because I happen to know that's the content I have. And then let's add another action. And what we're going to do is we're going to set our variable value that we set up earlier on to hold the sentiment score. And we're going to put in there what we just got, the score from cognitive services. So this is it, a decimal number between 0 and 1. Okay, so we are all good there. Now we have to do the same thing for the other branch, but remember this was a little bit different. I mean, we still have to detect sentiment. Text analytics. Yes. Same sort of business in terms of the document. ID there. But the text which we need to analyze, instead of it being tags, it's that OCR content. It's the extracted text. There you go. And once again, let's just say that this is in English. And when we have the value, let us set our variable. Now, as I do this, there we go, score. It does make me think, actually, I could have neatened this up a little bit. You see, I could have actually just done a thing in the scope where I did this condition, but I just got the text that we were going to do the sentiment analysis for, be it tags or be it extracted text. And then I could have, after the scope, just done the sentiment analysis once. But okay, I missed a trick. It's always nice not to duplicate things like these calls to sentiment analysis and these setting variables. Okay, let's go on a little more. The last thing we want to do then, we have the value that we needed. So outside the scope, I'm going to do just one last thing, which is actually to write that sentiment back to SharePoint. So we're going to do a update, file properties, and once again, we'll put in the site information and the ID. Right, what are we going to set? Well, we want to set the scariness index with this sentiment score that we put in the variable. That's fair enough. And we're going to set that inclusion to not be approved anymore, but actually be to be complete. So we're not going to take any further actions once we've worked out the scariness once. So we save this. And we should now be ready to go. We can assess the scariness of those other items that were in our library. Okay, so back in the library, we still have a few items which we've not done any sort of analysis on. Let's do that now, shall we? Edit in grid view. So I can change a few of these at once. Approved. And again, please. Huh. It's a little bit tricky when it's quite wide like this. There's a lot of text in here. Let's just exit grid view, see where we are. And let's just do this one outside of grid view since it was being difficult. All right. Okay, so I hope we're getting, well, we are getting a bit of content. You see, that's running actually pretty quick. So what have we got? So the Halloween poem, positive. The Burns poem, positive. The candy picture, good. The colorful jelly beans, good. The group of girls looking happy, even though we have words like evil, etc. It seems to realize that this is jovial. But then the jack-o'-lanterns with the spider, quite a low score. Also the hat with the skull and crossbones on it. The Emperor of Ice Cream. Now, like I said, this poem, it's not really obvious straight away that this is negative, but it's actually got a very low score. So somehow the AI managed to sniff it out. And the Raven, that staple of Halloween from Edgar Allan Poe, has got a very low score too. However, I don't really like the way that this looks because at the end of the day, you know, the high numbers aren't scariness. They're actually positivity. So we need to change this around to make it clear that this is scariness. And the way we're going to do that is to change the conditional formatting for that column. So we go into the library settings and we go into the scariness field. And what we're going to do is we're going to put some so-called JSON into the column formatting here. I have prepared some based on a sample by Chris Kent that's available to everyone in GitHub, except I've swapped it around so that it gives a kind of inverse value. You will see what I mean in a minute. And so now if we go back, we can see that the stuff that scored highly for sentiment before actually scores lowly for scariness, and it's so down there in the green. But as we get down to the scary stuff, like the Halloween lights, we're getting into the red. And when we get down to the Raven and the Emperor of Ice Cream, we can see we're maxing out in the red. So that stuff is particularly scary. And there we go, a successful flow.